Hi there, I'm Tom Field. I'm Senior Vice President of Editorial with Information Security Media Group. Pleased to welcome you back to our regular Cybersecurity Leadership Forum. This is where we bring together CEOs and CISOs to discuss the leading security issues of the day. And today, we're talking about one of the biggest ones of the past year, cloud security. Now, as in the wake of COVID-19, almost every organization has adopted cloud computing to varying degrees. And yet, as they say, with great cloud computing power comes great responsibility to ensure that the organization's cloud security strategy is capable of protecting against the top threats and vectors. So to discuss this topic, we've assembled what I consider to be an all-star team of cybersecurity leaders with diverse insights to share. Let me introduce you to them now. We have got from vArmour, the CEO, Tim Eades.
Hey.
Nick Halsey, CEO of Okera.
Morning.
Chuck Brooks, CEO of Chuck Brooks Consulting.
Morning.
Dr. Rebecca Wynn, world-renowned CISO and CPO.
Pleasure.
And we've got Roger Sels, is the VP of Solutions EMEA with BlackBerry.
Morning.
Here's where we're going to begin. Let's talk about multi-cloud visibility. As you know, as more organizations shift infrastructure and services to the cloud, they adopt a multi-cloud strategy. It's gone from sort of dipping their toes into being fully immersed. But for all the benefits, there are some real challenges that come with multi-cloud environments. It can be difficult to secure because of a lack of visibility across hosts and services. And that gives the entry point to attackers to find potentially exploitable vulnerabilities within an organization's infrastructure. And it also does make it more difficult to meet compliance mandates. So my question for the panel, and Tim, how about if I send this your way first? What is the best strategy for increased visibility, and how does one go about implementing it?
It's a great question. Everybody is struggling with this. As you move towards the cloud and you go multi-cloud, applications are more distributed, but they talk across them, right? So, we were dealing with an insurance company the other day. They have an application running in Azure, but it talks back to the mainframe, and it talks across. So we look at it and we say, look, hey, customers need to look at application relationship management. And what we mean by that is, discovering and understanding the relationships of applications so they can look at dependency, they can look at resiliency across it. And that discovery of that visibility, absolutely critical, because they all communicate. And so that first discovery session is really, really important because, your mainframe has an application that talks to the Google Cloud, to the Azure, and all the way back across again. So you're going to go discover that. And, frankly, I think there's only one way to actually implement it, is try and use the telemetry of things that you've already bought. If you're running a large organization, I'd love to hear from Rebecca about this one. If you're running an organization, some of these organizations are like Frankenstein, right? They got arms and legs and they're all from different bodies and barely got two fingers from the same hand. But discovering it across it is very difficult. So you can't put new agents down or stuff like that. You're going to suck telemetry of the things that you've already got, and then you can build an implementation plan. So we think it's application relationship management. Discover what is communicating, the frequency, the volume, the velocity, and then from there, and do that by sucking telemetry out. And from there, you can build an implementation plan to lock and secure your assets much, much better.
One of the things I think is the biggest challenge is what's your true baseline? What do you have running on-prem? What do you have running in a hybrid? What do you have running in a single cloud? And most companies, even though they say on paper and they talk to the executives like, sure, we know it. If you start talking to the server team and the service team, and you're talking about the site reliability team, and you talk to the security team, and you get that and you're like, everybody lists what's actually running, and you compare that, you're going to be, my term, holy crap, Batman. No, what's port, protocol, services, what's supposed to be accepted? It's not that. You need to find what your true baseline is, and you need to get that normalized. What I mean by normalized is you need as quickly as possible get to a single pane of glass. And why, people are like, well, we only worry about cost and what tools are running for networking and security and compliance for Azure and AWS and GCP. That is the wrong attitude. Because I found time and time again, when I look to see what tools are available in those marketplace, and how they're looking to actually be able to tell me what's running in my network, what incidents are running in my network, what's performance, they're not always the same. And you find out you have a gap. Danger's always in the gap.
I like to just go back to business and partner with them, map out their critical processes, and then start understanding where is the data, which cloud are you using, especially when you look, I think outside of the US, you find more diverse clouds where somebody will be, well, this is the leading provider in Germany, and it's maybe a cloud provider you've initially never heard about, and they have their data in there. Another factor that I think we need to consider is the size of the organization. Has it grown through acquisition? Is it a startup? What phase of growth are they in? Just to give you an example, in a startup that I was with prior to joining BlackBerry, developers were just swiping credit cards and putting data in the cloud. And I only found that out even after talking to them. They're like, no, everything sits here on-prem, so they didn't feed me the right information. At some point, I'm talking to procurement, and they make an off-the-cuff comment about all of these cloud costs. I'm like, well, hang on, what cloud costs? Give me a list. And then I built a process and said, okay, if this is not an approved cloud and it's not on the list, we will stop reimbursing any claims for expenses. And gradually over time, that's how we mapped out what was out there. And people would then be incentivized to come and say, hey, I have a cloud. I'd like to get it off my credit card, take ownership with IT, please, and just provide it as a service. So I think that's also a consideration that you have to build in there.
What's happening is, it used to be you had everything in a data center and you could just secure the data center, and by virtue of that, everything was secured. But now there's creep into all these different clouds and different platforms, and there's really no way for IT or the CISO to know where it all goes. And so you have this problem where the weakest link is what's going to cripple you. You might have secured 5 of the 6, but you missed the 6th, and that's the weak point. And so what do you do? And I think that the answer is, you got to have a fresh approach. You have to think about abstracting the layers of security that you're implementing so that they can run across all of those clouds. So you need to secure independently, the application, the data, the users, and the devices, and those need to run across all the clouds and on-prem. And I think if you can get that kind of policy layer abstracted, I think people understand that about identity access management, but they're just beginning to understand that that's what you need to do with your data and your applications as well. Or you're going to miss, there's going to be a chink in the armor, and that's where the barbarians will be at the gate, so to speak.
It really comes down to basically, again, risk management. It's not any different than it is on-prem. And unfortunately, a lot of the companies just don't have even what the gap analysis ready for prem, and they transfer to the cloud. So you're basically confounding the problem. And I think the other things that we need to look at is a shared responsibility. If you're going to be looking at hybrid clouds, there might be different configurations, there might be different compliance issues, there might be different data flows that we have to look at. So it's not an easy decision. And I think one of the problems that people make when they migrate to cloud is they don't look at this up front. They look at it after the fact. And I think that's why risk management really needs to be integrated up front in every process.
I want to switch over and talk about business enablement. So Gartner says that security leaders who reorient their roles around business enablement will find that their technical, conceptual, and practical experiences make them ideally suited to help their organizations make controlled, compliant, and economical use of the public cloud. Sounds great when Gartner says it. My question, and Nick, maybe you can take this first. What's been your real world experience? Is the business enablement premise justified?
It is completely justified, but there are barriers that make it super hard, right? Everybody wants to take the magic aspirin, the vitamin that's going to drive their digital transformation and enable their businesses to be agile and have, better performance and higher customer satisfaction and on-time delivery or whatever it might be. The problem is it's really hard to enable that digital transformation, the access to the data that's going to drive that across the organization. We talk about democratizing data, but if the security models and the infrastructure management don't keep pace with that, then IT goes back to just being a bottleneck again. It's really frustrating. I mean, we talked to dozens of customers and they're like, well, we've only really been able to, get these 2 research groups going. And there's a 9-month backlog because there's no standards for, distributing authorized access to the data that's necessary for, the machine learning or the analytics or the AI processes that companies are desperately trying to implement.
I think one of the challenges from a CISO standpoint is we still have companies who say, hey, I want zero risk, but I want you to enable the business. Don't necessarily go hand in hand. I don't think it's a job of a CISO to have zero risk. It's get within the risk tolerance that the clients and the executives are willing to tolerate. And one of the challenges today is when you look at all the different things that you can connect on a SaaS model, great innovations, great things along those lines on being able to process things very quickly, but security, privacy, compliance by design and by default isn't there. And so one of the things is every time you want to add more features and benefits, every single time you want to go ahead and add this new automation tool, every single time you want to go ahead and get into this new vertical, you want to do it on steroids. But the security, privacy, and compliance are going to be lagging because they're not innately built in. And you want me at 5 o'clock, you want me to approve this whole maybe different setup in 30 minutes, and I can't do it. So one of the challenges we always have is how do we get embedded quickly and early in the process? And I think one of the things that I've been running into time and time again is the timeline for companies to actually go ahead and migrate or to get something more enabled in the cloud. Timeframes are massively off. They can be off by years because they think it's a turnkey flip. Shared model does not mean that you have no responsibility whatsoever.
I think the complexity in a hybrid situation or a multi-cloud environment is that the shared responsibility model will differ with all of your cloud providers. So you are taking on more complexity within the security team to just map out, okay, I've got these 5 features supported in that cloud. Do I have it in the other one? So that has a cost, and typically that's a bit of a hidden cost. So if you want to still protect the business adequately, it becomes a trade-off of, okay, are we taking on more cost within the security and IT teams, and is the business becoming, let's say, more agile? And where the scale is sufficiently large, that might actually become a zero-sum game where the cost is just transferred, as I said. I think one aspect to add to that, of course, is that so once you've mapped out that shared responsibility model, you also need to look at what is the delta with my current security controls. Do I lose visibility into attacks? Do I lose monitoring capabilities across a number of these fields? And then you can really come back to the business and say, okay, I understand you want to cut costs. And even if you look at data that's public, there are a lot of claims saying, well, if you operate at a sufficiently large scale, that cost savings doesn't always tend to happen, but then you can inform them better. I've seen cases with on-prem where once you have a really good and well-defined process and really good collaboration between IT, the business, and security, you can turn around any business request in a matter of hours instead of taking weeks and months. But yeah, you need to partner with the business to achieve that.
It really comes down to, there are a lot of challenges with these security models and pricing. It comes down to implementation. And I think the problem for a lot of companies is that their IT people do not know how to adapt to it. They may not have the expertise. They may not have training. So then you're adding a gap there too that needs to be fulfilled. So you need to plan for it. Otherwise, you're not going to be able to mitigate any of these issues.
The way I look at it is, security is a business enabler, right? It's like having brakes on a car. They actually allow you to go faster. And when you start to look at, policy as code, you can embed things further up the chain. But the CISO partnering with the line of business is key, fundamentally key.
Folks, I'm going to switch over and talk about cloud access. Cloud-based deployments are outside the network perimeter, directly accessible from the public internet. And while this is an asset, certainly for accessibility of this infrastructure to employees, to customers, it also makes it easier for an attacker to gain unauthorized access to an organization's cloud-based resources. As we know, improperly configured security or compromised credentials can enable this attacker to gain direct access, potentially without an organization's knowledge. So my question, and Chuck, I'd love if you can take this first, given the experience you have with many organizations, is how big is this access problem, and what is the best path toward controlling and managing the threats?
It's a big question. And I think you hit it on the point, right? It really comes down to privilege access management and knowing who's in the system and who has privileges and who's operating on it. And having basically, I would go with the zero trust model if possible, because there's so much risk and entailed in that. The second thing I would have to do is, and I think that, the lesson of SolarWinds is you just need to encrypt, because inevitably going to be hacked. Particularly, the cloud is no guarantee that you're not going to be hacked. It may really be a single point of access for a very sophisticated hacker if it's a nation state. So I think you have to look at this and create basically a privilege framework of who gets to do what, where, and when, and make sure that it's strongly adhered to.
This is something that we're very passionate about at Okera. It's the heart and soul of what we do, is to think about how do you govern that access? I mean, the problem is access was viewed so simplistically before. You're either in or you're out. And once you're in, you've got access to the keys to the kingdom. So you've really got to think about that zero trust and understand how to grant privileges selectively and particularly at runtime. And it has to be contextual. How are people accessing? Where are they accessing from? Maybe somebody has credentials, but they're not coming in from a regular location. So geofencing can help stop that. And when they do get access, what do they see? Maybe they can see sensitive data, but you've been able to, mask it, redact it, obfuscate it in a way that, if it's a legitimate use, you can still interact with the data, but it's not actually, if you're just trying to steal it, it's not in a format that's going to be helpful. And, that's what we do. That's what we care about. And we see our customers, this is exactly the problem, because if you want to grant access, it's like trust, but verify. You've got to be able to verify, and you've got to have fine-grained control over what you're giving people access to.
Zero trust needs to come at it from two angles: from the user and the devices in, right? But also from the applications out. You can have, I agree with Chuck a little, you can have privileged access management on one side and going in, or IGA tools like a SailPoint or whatever, but you need to know reality. And only by understanding application relationships can you actually understand reality. It's crazy to me that I find that enterprises that don't know who actually really is accessing an application, who really is, not who should, who is. And so when you look at zero trust, you do it from the user and the devices in, but the applications and the assets out as well. Those two combined, transforms the security posture.
One of the things is really be careful when you go ahead and you look at people who have legacy systems and legacy groups. One thing I notice is when you really do a deep dive through Active Directory and what's going on, there's a lot of nested groups. I found more than one time in my career where I've seen that, like, the networking team ends up being domain admin, enterprise admin, backup admin, admin of the admin, server, everything else, and they have permission underneath the sun. And all I have to do is compromise one of those people, and I just own everything in your network. So one of the things is you might say, hey, what does this one person have access to? But you really have to see what are all the other avenues out of any system that they possibly can touch based upon them. So even beyond a little bit more of the zero trust, we all agree is where we need to be in the future, but you got to look to see where do they touch? Ports, protocols, services, any system that they can possibly touch is now a jumping point that I can get anywhere else, right? That's how we can ride the rails and get anywhere in the organization. So also you need to look at all your key people, all your administrators, and you really need to do a deep dive on every single one of their permission sets.
I agree with everything everyone has said so far, but I find it interesting that you've all focused on our staff, on the internal people. While I worry most about, okay, what are the processes with my service provider, with my cloud provider? What is their break glass procedure if somebody's going to, I don't know, cold boot one of my backup servers, copy the database. Do I have any visibility into that? I guess, I mean, to deal with my internal staff issues and their privileges, we like to deploy a UEBA. So we have behavior analytics, and then you can have that feed into a risk scoring engine that can determine, okay, this person is now starting to access too many records. It becomes an insider threat, all of that. So I think that problem is well understood and well managed or well manageable, but it's that what's outside of your sphere of direct control, would you even have visibility into it? That keeps me up at night.
We've got to develop our muscle strength around least privileged access management, because, you know, most employees, they have this long tail of credentials that never get cleaned up, right? And that's, you know, that's just good hygiene. And, you know, you need really good tools for reporting on who's accessing what, as Roger was talking about, and you need the analytics, and you want to be able to correlate those. I mean, you know, Tim and I have worked together, our companies, to integrate our two products, for example. So not only can you see what's happening with your application relationships, but you can see which ones are processing the most sensitive PII data, and maybe those come to the forefront in your spotlight of what you're monitoring. And so there's a high degree of incumbency on the vendor community to make sure that our tooling interoperates optimally, so that you can kind of get that, you know, theoretical single pane of glass that looks at what are the applications doing, what data are they processing, and what are these users doing, and which ones are behaving suspiciously. And if you can get that comprehensive view, that's a big step, especially if it can look across, you know, your different data centers, whether you're in a public cloud data center, private cloud, or on-prem, or some combination of those.
I want to go beyond this. We talked about access and misconfiguration. Let's talk about credential hijacks. So an attacker with an employee's credentials, they can access sensitive data, functionality, and compromised customer credentials give full control over the online account. Additionally, in the cloud, organizations often lack the ability to identify and respond to these threats as effectively as they could maybe in an on-premises infrastructure. So my question, and Rebecca, I'd love for you to tackle this one first. What methods for hijacking prevention do you find to be the most effective, and how do we implement these controls?
I would say one of the things that I've noticed more recently, I wouldn't say really noticed, it's creeped up. Again, most of the things that we're talking about here, it's not really new. It's the same great stuff that we should have been doing over 20, 25 years ago that we're talking about. But I found time and time again, whether being working directly for a company and consulting, when I look at what are you doing with your key management? What are you doing with your session tokens? How are you encrypting them? How often are you changing them? Do you have credentials embedded in code? When's the last time, if you had to have it embedded in code, what's the last time you changed that? Time and time again, that's when you see that's why they're failing. Again, it's lazy, sloppy security and privacy in by design. That same laziness continuing. And one of the things that, too, is that, you know, you're leaving it up into the infrastructure team, you're leaving it up into the dev team, you're leaving it up into the site reliability team. And as we go ahead and we move more and more into cloud, I see that where the security, compliance, and privacy is an afterthought. You think that those teams will focus where the bad guys are going to attack you as much as the security, compliance, and privacy professionals. They're not. You know, their focus more is on availability, getting you up and running, not negating that. I'm an engineer myself too. But you have to have someone else who comes in and says, yeah, but can I go ahead and, like you said, hijack that? Yeah, but can I go ahead and, even if I left the company 3 months, 6 months, or 9 months, is your credentials still the same? And can I do nefarious things to you? You have to have those people who are thinking outside the box that way. And I've seen time and time again, when you look at these breaches, you'll see again, they were able to take the credential. When's the last time that that credential actually was changed? When time was that session key changed? Those same bad practices are continuing. Going to the cloud isn't changing that. You really got to get back to the fundamentals, and you have to enforce the fundamentals. And if that means that you need to go ahead and get on the roadmap that you need an extra week or you need an extra 3 days, it is better to go ahead and take that than to go ahead and to have that breach and that reputation management, and probably could even put you out of business.
The only thing I would add is that every company should have regularly re-authentication for each of its users because it could happen so quickly, and it's not difficult to implement, and they should do that as a rule or a mandate by the security team.
Yeah, and I'll volley it back to Chuck. So on one thing here, so if you do app to app, user to app, app to data, and user to data, which is kind of what Nick and Okera and vArmour do together, you start to get a very good view. But the other thing that we're seeing is the underbelly of this thing is service accounts, right? And that is a wide open, soft underbelly of an average organization. So I would love to hear what Chuck or Rebecca think of service accounts, because this type of underbelly on compromise is incredible.
One thing I know is about service accounts, and I look when we're bringing people in, if you do not have, true security engineers, not by title, but true, they don't look at what's the ports, protocol, services, API calls that you're going to make, and you just give it to maybe an infrastructure team or cyber liability team or whatever else you want to call it. What they'll do is they'll look at all these ports just need to be open. Why? Why does that port have to be open? Why do I need to have that call? Because I'll tell you, a lot of times I say, oh, heck to the no. You ain't going to do that. I'm not going to have that. And that's one of the things that you see, again, it's being sloppy. And you think about how many of these different applications are coming in, third-party risk management, fourth-party risk management. It's dangerous. And I'll give you an example. I recently was reviewing something for a government contractor, and their managed service provider was like, hey, we want to go ahead and do business with these people to do backups and reliability. I start doing my deep dives, and then I started looking at what data center they used. Then their data center then was offshore to other data centers, and it was our portfolio of all these API calls and all that kind of stuff. And I went back to the main client. I said, I'm just telling you, I strongly can't recommend that, because look at all of the APIs, open source, all this other spider webs, all of the attack vectors that you have by doing business this way. This is how I would streamline it instead this way. But I would tell you, there's too many security, privacy, cyber liability engineering, infrastructure people. They don't take the time to really map out where's your data going and where are all the avenues that you possibly can be attacked. Because all they have to do is they have to be successful once, guys. We have to be successful every single time. And that's why I keep people, I'm not putting a stop, but I'm putting a pause. It's pause for your greater good. You really got to map that stuff out.
If we look at any lessons from the last couple of years in breaches, it's been third-party risk management issues, and it could come in through patches or whatever. But most companies and most individuals are not paying attention to those risks, and therefore it's really easy picking for hackers. And so I think we really have to focus on this. Is really one of the fundamental aspects of risk is a third-party risk, particularly for supply chain now. We're sort of after the fact with government looking at it. But we already find they're already in the system, and same with SolarWinds. So, we really have had a wake-up call, and I think if we're going to say there's a holy grail of everything to learn, it is this third-party risk management issue.
Look, the reality is we're not going to be able to prevent every breach, right, Rebecca? I mean, it just, you do your very best job, but there's going to be a gap. And so it's kind of like, we live in the San Francisco Bay Area. It's not if an earthquake is going to happen, it's when. So you have to be as best prepared so that not only are you trying to prevent it from ever happening, but on the assumption it will, how can you minimize the damage when it does happen? How can you make sure that they get the least amount of access to the least amount of the least valuable data, right? Ideally. And I think you've got to really get nuanced about prioritizing the, critical PII and PHI that you're trying to protect, right? That, I mean, we all know it's the loss of all the credit card information or the social security numbers that really drives everybody, ballistic, because that's what matters the most. And so I think you've got to have a tiered protection strategy as well, so that those crown jewels are the ones that you've really spent the most time on, because you're just not going to stop it. I mean, unfortunately.
If you provide your staff with any website that's your company name.cloudprovider.com and it's their usual email address giving them access, everyone is just going to duplicate their password with your external partner. So I think to avoid that, What I like to do is I grab control of authentication and authorization as much as possible, integrate into my identity provider, slap two-factor authentication on it, I'm done. Now I've reduced that attack surface. I've taken care of that risk, especially if it's client-facing, and these are then accounts that are also probably, or passwords that are reused on their email, on other providers. You've just taken that risk out of the equation, and then you can focus on something else.
And that's a great point. I've had several consults really in the last 6 months where the company, when you talk about, do we have backups? Do we have business continuity? Do we encrypt our data? We do all those great things. They did. However, what they did is, again, where you can have reuse of email address as your authentication, as your username, password, all that stuff. And what it was is attackers were able to get into the credentials. And what they did is, because they can't get to the data, what they did is they actually were able to take over all the credentials. And then what they did is they held them credential hostage. I can't see your data, but you can't run your business because you're now going to have to pay me so you can get your credentials out and you get into anything. Kind of ingenious, as well too. But again, if they had some of those other things in place, or, here's a one-time session token, here's different things along those lines, here's the two-factor, not always using your email address as your username, things along those lines, then maybe that wouldn't have happened. But we've seen a very much so an increase in those type of attacks. I think, Nick, you were going to say something?
I was just going to agree with you. I mean, we see that credential hijacking happening a lot. And so one of the things, though, it's very hard for a hijacker to do is to use the credential from the same location that the credentialed user does. And so one of the things that our customers are doing quite aggressively now is they're looking at location. So it's like, oh, Chuck just logged in correctly, but he's not in his normal location in California. He's in another country. He's somewhere. And so, no, you're denied because of that. And it's ephemeral. So you've got to be able to do sort of like checking real-time state-based attributes and use that as part of the policy definition.
One more topic I want to bring up, and it comes back to something Roger was talking about earlier, insider risk. Insider threats are a major security issue for any organization, whether they're malicious, accidental, you've got a compromised user. On the cloud, detection of insider threat is even more difficult. So my question to Roger, since you brought it up, I'd love for you to kick this one off. What controls manage against insider threats, and how do you effectively prevent against a malicious or compromised insider gaining access and walking off with your digital crown jewels?
I think a number of suggestions have already been raised, ensuring that you have visibility on all of the access permissions, going back to the principle of least privilege, of course. But then I think, like I said, using behavior analytics can really, and machine learning can help you understand when there is a deviation away from a user's normal profile. You can start profiling, and I know that word can have a bad connotation, but I just mean it in a benign way. Assessing one individual's behavior against a team member with a similar role. If you see some deviations there, you can go and investigate that. So I think that technology can really help you. Other than that, I'm open to hearing other ideas. Rebecca, maybe what would you suggest?
I don't trust people on how they come in, right? I can use other VPNs to connect to your VPN. It can make me look like I'm in India. It make me look like I'm in California. It can make me look anywhere. One thing is if you're going to have a person using your system, I would embed a geolocator into their system. So that way, even you can also tell that someone's trying to do something nefarious. I've had people who've been down in Mexico, for example, and you're like, wait a minute, why are you're crossing borders now with my data? And I see that you're coming from Mexico, but you're trying to tell me that you're coming from, whatever, San Jose, or you're trying to tell me you're coming from Toronto, but you're not. So I think one of the things is you need to be embedding those type things in there. The other thing that as we do work from home, what is a trusted person in your home? And a lot of us have been working from home for years, and I've always been really good. Again, I came up from the government sector, but that is going to be innate all the time. And so with that, It's a lot easier to go ahead and have any type of IoT device. I could be recording you. I could be doing almost anything. And I would tell you, a piece of paper signing off, you won't do it, doesn't really work. So I think one of the things is you really need to start looking at how are you going to be able to better monitor on your system? Does that mean you have cameras on it all the time? If you have a call center, maybe you need to have 2 cameras. You have the embedded camera, so you can have, that's about 105-degree angle, right? And then you might have a webcam on top where you have about 180 degrees, right? Because you need to see who's really around their systems and what devices are there. And then, so I think you're going to find a lot more that way. What we have also done is I've seen people embedding on a stealth mode, warning to everybody too, where people are actually monitoring how many keystrokes are people are doing, what applications are actually touching, trying to catch people if they're not working and working. And so I think that we're going to really see an uptick in Big Brother that way. I like it and don't like it, right? It's like I like you and I don't trust you. And it can be used to be seen if something nefarious is running on your system. But you can be doing it to make sure that I don't even blink 3 times in an hour by working. But we have to make a shift because we're never going to shift everybody back into the office. But we're exposed from a physical security perspective because every single place that laptop goes with the person is now a satellite office for you. And people are forgetting about that. That affects your PCI, your HIPAA, your FedRAMP, whatever regulations you're going in. Every one of them has been affected. In 2020, people kind of did a wink, wink. Yeah, we'll buy more risk. Not in 2021, GDPR, CCPA, all those other type of things along those lines. So I think we have to do a more concerted effort on not only about the application services that are something is touching on those credentials, but is the person behind the keyboard who's doing it that person? We really have to be looking about how to do that more mindful.
Yeah, I don't think anybody is looking forward to a Big Brother state. I mean, this is the problem. I mean, you want to be able to trust your employees, but you've got to be able to verify. We think a lot about this. I mean, if you're going to enable all this access to data, which you really want to do, I mean, that's your business imperative, right? You also have to be able to distribute the stewardship of that data across the organization as well. And then you have to be able to do that in a way where you're able to really report and analyze on who's doing what with the data. That visibility is so critical. I think you've got to have a 3-legged stool. You've got to have the authorization tools. You've got to have the ability to distribute governance across the organization. And then you have to have that centralized ability for reporting and analysis. And it's very hard to get that balance right. It's going to be a top imperative this year, as you say, for 2021.
There's new technologies out there now that allow you to monitor who really is accessing an application, who really is. I know you got IGA and PAM, and you can do everything authentication down to the end user level, but why don't you monitor your crown jewels and say, let me tell you who really is accessing the application? That reality, that observed reality is now available for customers to use it on their databases, on their IP or whatever it is. And they should start to look at that.
Real-time monitoring is a needed capability. Unfortunately, a lot of businesses don't have access to it or understand it or use it, and they should be. I think with insider threats, most of this is negligence from employees, although there is still, some state-sponsored actors who have stolen lots of IP, but very deliberately from companies involved in the security sector. So it's a real challenge still. I mean, I think everything has been said, right, where it is the right answer. And I think, again, is we've got the tools and the processes out there, but we just don't seem to be enforcing them. And I think maybe that's where we need to go with policies now, like GDPR, because unless you enforce them, most people are not going to put it towards their bottom line. They'll take the risk of being breached rather than invest in their own security.
Folks, great conversation. It's time to close up with our lightning round. Closing thoughts here. My question for each of you is, digital transformation and mass cloud migration, they were the headlines in 2020. What do you think, as we look back on this year, are going to be the big cloud security stories of 2021? Tim, you got us started. Wrap us up.
Yeah, I think this is going to be where security really turns around and says, hey, what can I can I make more of the things I've already bought? How do I consolidate things? How can I integrate things and get more value out of it? So we think relationships matter, and we think connecting and understanding relationships over your assets and your identities across it. And I think this is the year when you are Frankenstein, and you're going to get comfortable with it. You've got a little bit of mainframe, a little bit of public cloud, but you can improve your security posture very simply by making more value of the things that you've got by leveraging the APIs and the telemetry from them.
I think that the way that manifests is what we were just talking about, which is observability, right? I think that people are going to be making a huge investment in that. They realize the reality, it's permanent. It's not a COVID temporary thing. We're going to be multi-cloud and hybrid forever and working from everywhere in the world. And so how do we get observability across all of that? Because if we can't monitor and have visibility into it, we're not going to be able to identify where weaknesses exist and where we need to shore up our defenses. So I think observability is the top line.
Yeah, I think it's going to be a wake-up call. And what I mean by that is I think public and I think companies can say, we're tired of the lip service of security, privacy, and compliance. Or, hey, we fixed the breach this time, and then hopefully we'll be out of the news cycle in 72 hours. And you see it comes up time and time again. I think people are tired of it. And I think companies are tired of seeing third-party and fourth-party vendors not being able to do what they say they're going to do. Mm-hmm. So I think this is going to be the wake-up call year. And then I hope going into next year, security CISOs like myself, chief privacy officers, that we see that we are going to be elevated and thought of as the same or maybe even higher than the CIOs. I'm hoping that this is our empowerment year because you do see GDPR, CCPA are going to be coming with a lot of heavy fines. If you're not look at that, I think you're going to have some really big announcements in the next 6 months on that line. So I think it's going to set us up for 2022. I wish it was going to set up for 2021, but that's where I think that people should start paying attention. I think people are tired of the same companies having breaches over and over again, usually over misconfigurations. Sometimes that's miscommunication. Authentication controls, and just really being sloppy because you're trying to save a buck to go ahead and rush to market.
I would add to that, well, as we all agreed, 2020 was about agility and about continuity. 2021 is all about resilience. So going back to where have we cut a corner to be agile? What is the risk? How can we maintain that client trust? That regulatory trust and enable the business to continue accelerating in a secure manner. So finding out the real risk posture is going to be key this year, as Rebecca also alluded to.
The CISO is going to take a more important role. And I think part of that is going to be dealing with the complexity now of our systems. And when you have like 10, 15 vendors and 50 different security products, orchestration becomes an issue. And I think now with the hybrid cloud environments, CISOs are going to have to be the ones to really evaluate what is needed and what's not needed. And so I think the role, again, is going to be really elevated.
Well, folks, very well said. As always, I appreciate all the diverse perspectives we've had here today. We could talk about cloud security for hours, but it's been a great start. So panelists, thank you so much for your time and your insight today. Of course, to our audience, thank you for giving us your attention today. I really enjoy these conversations with CEOs and CISOs talking about the issues that really matter. I want to hear your feedback. Please give us thoughts and ideas of topics you would like to see discussed in this format. And hey, if you want to join the discussion, let us know that too. For Information Security Media Group, I'm Tom Field. Thank you so much for your time and attention.